Food, glorious food, Jack. You ready to talk about it?
Nibbling on a biro.
Yeah, well, we're going to need something more
starving.
substantial than that. Welcome, everybody, to this ThinkIn. We're really excited tonight to be in conversation with Jack Monroe, who you might have heard of. But if you haven't, Jack, I'm just going to run through a few descriptors. The Bootstrap cook, author, single mom, food inequality campaigner, anti-austerity warrior, statistician, and as I now know, self-described feisty little oik on Twitter. And Jack, as about of an hour ago, you're also Campaigner of the Year for honoured by the Sheila McKechnie Foundation. So what about that? And she actually got like a Perspex sheriff's badge, didn't you? But we might have already lost it, or somebody's put it in safekeeping. Yeah, it could have been a wooden spoon, but it turned out to be a Perspex star. Let's start with that. How does that feel?
Well, there's a real duality to it, as I said about half an hour ago, and there's a sort of mumbled, garbled response up here, in that it's very humbling and gratifying for the work that I do to be recognised, because 99% of my time is spent stomping around my house with my mobile in my hand, sort of Wizard of Oz style. I'm kind of like this. I'm actually quite timid and shy in real life, but I go behind my curtain and boom out into my Twitter feed all these expletives and all this fury, and it's nice to feel that makes a bit of a difference and that's appreciated. But at the same time, there's something really discomforting about the fact that it's so necessary in the first place, and necessary to a point of recognition where it can be awarded. And it's like, well, actually, I'd much rather that I just could fade away into the background and be completely not required. Actually, me and zillions of other campaigners, the overarching theme tonight of everybody who has been honoured and recognised for their phenomenal work is that everybody's been shouting about causes that really, in a just and equal society, shouldn't require rabble-rousers and individuals and organisations and phenomenal amounts of fizzing injustice and passion and time and effort and energy to draw attention to.
And I think as journalists, I suppose we sometimes follow the same path as campaigners and often are inspired by them and sometimes diverge from them. Our imperatives are different. But if you're joining us for the ThinkIn and you're not sure what we're talking about, we had this awards ceremony in our newsroom only about an hour ago, and just some fantastic people walked into the room who were campaigning on everything from government efforts to stop stop people being charged and prosecuted for torture. We had Kwejo Tenebara, who's the housing campaigner, who was feted in the room and much honoured for the work he's done both on his own estate and nationally. It was an amazing group of people, and as you say, so much energy to draw from and inspiration. I think it's worth saying that our founder James Harding was scribbling in his notebook a week or so ago in a meeting, and he rather sort of portentously wrote down, "Do something or leave," and people weren't sure if that was like a warning to them or a signal of the fact that he was about to fly. But I think what he meant by it was, you can't just sit in despair about the failings of democracy or anything else and not do something about it. So you might as well. As it turns out, we're still here. So we've announced that this is Do Something Week at Tortoise. So I should ask you though, before we really dig in, I mean, I sort of want to ask you how you are, because you've had like You've had a
I've
week.
got 2 therapists. It's fine. I will have this all out with them over the next couple of days. 2 therapists and an AA sponsor. I'm good for people asking me how I am. We don't have time for that.
All right. Okay.
Frazzled, absolutely dead on my feet, exhausted,
And a
but
lot of-
still here. 50% espresso, 50%.
What was the second 50%? I heard the espresso
People
bit.
say, how do you keep going? I'm like, so at this point it's 50% espresso, 50% rage. And anytime I need a little refresher, I just sort of go and look at what the government is saying about the cost of living, and then I'm off again.
I have seen it written that people imagine you with your whiteboard and your great sort of planner for the year and your campaign. And actually, it's not really that, is it?
No, so this is a 2021 diary on this desk.
How's it going so far?
It's not. It's being used as a notebook because I don't plan anything. It's impossible to plan anything. My life is an absolute chaos. I've got 146,000 unread emails on my phone at the moment.
And but you wake up angry and then you get to work.
Well, it's sort of I wake up, and then the news comes in, and then it's like, oh God, stuff to do again. There's always something to do. There's always. I went away with my partner, who has been suffering me through this whole. We got together shortly before the whole Vimes Boots Index cost of living thing came out. We had a nice week. Where I was basically in bed with depression. And I was like, this is nice, potted around, cooked some risotto, nice, comfortable, It was a bit of a kind of like and so eased them in nice and gently. It's like, yeah, life is nice. I can keep my house tidy-ish. Depression doesn't really help with that. But, it's all nice and sort of mellow. And then it just went boom, and it's not stopped ever since. And they're just sitting there kind of perpetually shell-shocked. So it took me away for a couple of days, the week before last, to Venice, which was absolutely gorgeous. I was literally like, you are going to die if you carry on like this. We're going away for a few days. And I said, oh, that's nice. And until I lost signal on the plane, I was furiously tweeting about the cost of living. And then I was like, oh, we're in the air. We're in the, oh no.
So enforced silence. That's already interesting because I've seen you suggest that you consider yourself to be under surveillance from the conservative right. People watch everything you say and every move you make. And I guess, when you're writing about food inequality and going to Venice, people are going to go, oh, there you go.
And I always feel like I have to justify things like that. And I'm like, do you know what? I work 7 days a week, 120 hours a week, the majority of that unpaid. If my partner wants to whisk me away to some 3-star hole somewhere, but next to a canal, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to knob around. I'm going to eat some gelato. I'm going to chill out. And by the time we were landing again at Stansted Airport, as the signal was coming in on my phone, Newsnight were in touch, going, can you come on and talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments? Can you come on and talk about that? I was like, this is it, literally. My only downtime was literally physically when I was in the sky, unable to get a phone signal. I was walking around Venice on the phone to Radio 4.
Have you thought about slow news as a pass?
Do you know what? Actually, I do. I am quite. I've been. I'm trying to get this sentence out now. It's been a long day with a lot of stuff in it. I've been writing a book for the last 3 years about the impact of austerity on everyday people, and especially on black and ethnic minority communities and working class people and women over the last 12 years. And that's taken 3 years so far to pull together, simply because of the sheer amount of information gathering and data and interviewing and asking people to relive trauma and then digging through that stuff and trying to sensitively write about it. And I won't say I enjoy that because that's actually quite a traumatic project, but things like the Vimes Boots Index and we will get to that. I keep name dropping that like it's a hashtag, and I'm like, like it's already a thing. It is a thing. It just exists in 1,000 supermarket receipts on the floor of my office at the moment. But I did an investigation a few years ago into the MPs that had voted against the bedroom tax while claiming for second homes and hotels, who lived less than 25 miles from their constituency. So cross-referenced all this massive data, took a month to pull it together, went in a couple of newspapers. So I do like big, deep dive, investigative, factual news projects. And I did have, I'm going to tout myself a bit here, but I was sitting on the step outside there in between the awards thing and here, like just having a sort of a moment. I thought, I wonder if there's a space in the Tortoise newsroom for a slightly scrappy but more chilled out than she appears, statistically minded, autistic, very quiet in real life, investigative reporter. Because I could do with... Every day I'm hustling, as the kids say. But you know what I could do with a steady income stream? I'm not going to lie. 7 pence a cookbook doesn't cut it.
Weirdly, I'm sort of thinking of like, you know, is there a space at Tortoise for someone who would really just rather make sourdough and not do journalism? But that's just the stuff I bring.
I can bring the sourdough in if it would.
You and I could run that department. I think that would be great. But so okay, I mean, you got in a bit of a fight with a Conservative MP, didn't you, a few days ago? And I'd like to. Yeah, which one? Right?
Which fight? Which MP? Because there's been some scraps lately.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of Lee Anderson. We might get to that in a bit more detail later on, but
I'd probably say that as I have instructed libel proceedings, that I'm limited as to what I can say in public about that whole situation.
But that is a confirmation on the record,
yes, it is on the
live
record.
on Tortoise, though, that you are suing him.
I am sending a legal letter letting him know that what he said was libelous and defamatory and has contributed to the downfall of my what I have of a reputation, and that he might want to reconsider his stance publicly. And to all the other agitators and instigators of that.
Yes.
But yes, I have instructed lawyers, and we are in touch. Unfortunately, my lawyer decided to go off and get married this week. So it's been, I mean, it's a bit rude. It's been in the planning for a few years, but he could have timed it better.
I assume you've got him on speed dial for these sorts of occasions because you've, you know, I mean, I'd like to go. I know obviously you might be limited in what you can say about that, but let's get to it later. But I mean, the thing that it did make me want to ask early on, though, is that you know you're kind of in this like 24-hour siege on social media, aren't you? You're in a battle with the conservative right, and I just wonder like how. I mean, I can't stand it if someone says something mean about something I've written on Twitter. How do you live with that?
So
to your campaigning.
So it's a twofold element that has taken several years of therapy. But there's, on the one hand, 95% of the time I can go, if you're picking on me personally, it's because you don't want to engage with the arguments. So if you're making false accusations about my income or about my morals or about things I've said or things I've done, or if that is your only recourse to this discussion is lies, slander and defamation, then actually it's because you don't want to engage with austerity, your contribution to that, people dying as a result of DWP, malpractice, all of those things. And it's going, okay, well, if you just want to talk to me about how you think I'm a shoddy human being, I don't really have very much time for that, actually, because I know myself better than anyone. And I think that my moral code is all right. And I think that I do all right trying to live by it. But 5% of the time, usually when I'm in a depressive episode or when I'm exhausted or, well, you know, various human failings and flaws that come into play, it gets right under my skin. And it hurts. It really genuinely hurts. And sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't admit it hurts because then they'll do more of it. Is it a weakness when you admit that you're vulnerable? Some people seek to exploit that vulnerability. But it does hurt. I'm a human being. I am not a guardian avatar. I was not a project dreamed up in the basements. I know, I was not literally. But some people seem to think I've just sprung into life mid-2012 as a sort of a guardian project. And I'm like, no, I'm a human being. I live in the world, and I read the things that you say about me, and sometimes they hurt. But most of the time, I just go, so what have you got? And do you know what? When it's anonymous trolls on Twitter, I can just mute it. But when it's MPs, I go, sorry, but you are using the taxpayers' money for your time and that equipment and that office to sit in and just write slanderous and awful things about, what, a food blogger? Do you think that's really the best use of my taxes? Because I don't.
It made me wonder, like, are your recipes that hard to follow?
I'm just like, look, mate, you know, it just doesn't even, like, in my head, I just go, well, these are like senior Conservative officials taking time out of their day to make up crap about me on the internet. Okay. Have you literally got nothing else that you could be doing with your time right now that is more important? Like all those constituents in your mailbag who are using food bags, who are starving, who are freezing, all the pensioners sitting at home in their coats, all the mums who can't afford to send their kids on school trips. You know, you could be dealing with any of that stuff. You could be having a period of self-reflection about your contribution to that situation. You could just be being quiet. Yeah. But no, you just, no. But no, for some reason, somebody who takes tins of baked beans and throws them together and takes half-decent pictures of them and puts them on the internet is the subject of your ire. And that's perplexing.
And I mean, you've talked about MPs there. Obviously, it's Conservative commentators as well. I mean, you really are catnip for them. Do you reflect on why that is? And do you think it's about more deep-seated and sort of mean-spirited things than just the fact that you're, you know, a warrior with a wooden spoon?
I think that people love the idea of Conservatives love to talk about social mobility for the working class until one of us actually gets some ideas and you know, and actually acts on that social mobility thing. And people love the whole rags to riches story until it happens. It hasn't happened. I'm waiting for the riches bit. I'm sort of at rags to slightly better rags, but that's fine. But people, it's almost like, because you know, I am a working class single mother, but I was on benefits. And I think even my first publisher kind of expected me to follow a very certain trajectory, where my first cookbook, A Girl Called Jack, budget recipes. My second cookbook, they wanted a hardback, £18, glossy, gorgeous, in their words, something like a cross between Nigella and Lorraine Pascal. I was like, why would I do that when both of those are very successful women with their own niches in the cookbook market, wildly different as well. I'm not sure how you would cross them. And the space that I occupy is so popular because it's completely unique. Yeah. So, because it's aspirational. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to find another publisher. Wow. Because that's not, and the press kind of expected me to do that as well. So when I was just the grateful single mother publishing recipes, thank you very much for my cookbook deal, they were like, oh, look at the single mother publishing 9p burgers. And the Telegraph and the Mail were very sympathetic and very lovely. And they kind of held me up as an example of what a poor could do if it just engaged itself. And
have you still got those reviews?
I still have those articles.
Collector's items.
And then when I started to open my mouth and go, oh yeah, it's not just about the burgers actually, it's about the reason why people need the burgers. They were like, oh, we don't like this. Quick, shoot her back down, shoot her back down. And it's like, what, you wanted me to basically pull the ladder up behind me, make the 9p burgers, make the money off the 9p burgers, and stop talking about the issues. And somebody that I worked with very early on in my career actually said to me, verbatim quote, if you just stopped talking about politics, we'd be able to get your books into Waitrose. And I was like, have you seen the size of the cookbook market that Waitrose actually occupies? Because that's not really a priority for me. And secondly, sorry, what? So I didn't stop talking about politics. I stopped talking to that person. I got myself new representation, and somebody who I've been with for 8 years now. She deserves a damehood, to be honest, for putting up with my crap. and who's never encouraged me to pull that ladder up behind me and go, well, actually, no, now I want... Well, you know, I've made no secret of the fact that one day I would quite like to just spend 6 months in the Kyrenian mountain regions of Cyprus, yomping around with a herd of goats, just like my great-uncle Nick used to do, cooking up all the recipes of my forefathers, putting together a glossy coffee table travelogue book and retire. But until not one person needs a 9p burger recipe, and until not one person needs somebody to be standing there banging on the doors of the government going, why do people need 9p burger recipes? That Cypriot cookbook dream is a very long way off just yet.
It's going to have to wait. Well, we'll get to how long you're doing this for in a minute. But I wonder, you know, we've already touched on loads of the current stuff, but it would be great, I think, just to sort of do the origin story and how you got here, because I think people would love to just hear your account of like how you went from single mom using food banks to, well, when did you start writing a blog and in what circumstances? And were you always a good cook?
Right, in order, backwards.
Thank you.
I like that 3 questions thing because it means that I can skip over the one that I don't really want to answer, which is, was I always a good cook? There's a story that that when my son's father and I have been friends for many, many years now, and he came around my house for dinner about 12 or 13, pre-Johnny, so 13 or 14 years ago. And I was like, need to cook manly food, I'll do a lamb stew. Now, I'd just moved out, well, I hadn't just moved out from my parents, I'd lived on my own for a few years, but I'd lived in house shares with people that we'd taken turns in cooking before. So this was my first out on a limb by myself. I'm making this lamb stew, and it just wouldn't thicken, it was just like broth. Now I would just serve it. That's a perfectly fine thing. I was like, I need some more flour to thicken it up. I'd read about it in a Gordon Ramsay book or something. So I made a little like slurry and I poured it in and I stirred it. It didn't thicken up. So I was like, oh, I'll stick some more in. I'll stick some more in. And went and answered the door. We sat down. We had a cup of tea. We had a good old chat. And when I came back to serve it, it was like a lamb dumpling. It was literally like carvable.
So did you slice it?
No, I just watered it down a little bit and nicknamed it lamb glue, and we still laugh about it today. And there's a reason why there's not a recipe for lamb stew in any of my cookbooks, because I have not cooked one since.
That's your nemesis then. So when you get to that point,
I can now thicken a stew without absolutely making a complete hash of it. But I was an absolutely awful cook when I left home. Yeah, I got a D in home economics at school. And my home ec teacher actually got in touch with me about when a girl called Jack came out a few months after to confirm that it was actually me that was now a best-selling cookery author, and to ask what had happened in the 10 years since I'd left her stewardship. Because I made rock cakes once that they still talk about, that I accidentally put like 10 times as much sugar in, so it was sort of just like a rock sludge, and it was delicious. Like something that's literally pure sugar is going to be very yummy. But I was a disastrous cook, but I just kept going. Just kept going and kept trying, and eventually some stuff stuck, and some stuff was so simple that even I couldn't cock it up, and I've managed to monetize that, and that's glorious.
Was your blog food first, politics second, or was it politics first?
Politics first. I was a single mum going to local council meetings and writing about them on the internet. Because a local councillor had written a big front page in the local paper at the time saying druggies, drunks and single mums are ruining the high street. And I'd gone past his billboard with my dad. I can't remember why me and my dad were roaming around the town at this point. But, and I'd gone and I'd bought a copy of the paper because I wanted to read the article. And I wrote a letter back that was so long and so furious that Echo serialised it over 3 days. And then one of my friends, who I knew from, we were both in bands at local pubs, and he was the features editor.
What did you play?
I sang. There's no video evidence anywhere. It was all pre all of that, which I'm very grateful for. And he got in touch with me, have you ever considered writing a blog? I said, what's a blog? And he's like, well, it's like an internet diary. And I was like, oh, actually, that sounds pretty good. All right, I'll start that. So I started writing about local politics from the perspective of a single mum on benefits living in the town. And I had about 17 readers. They were all local politics buffs themselves. So it was good. I thought that was a marvellous number of readers to have.
Comment? Was it all civilised?
It was fairly civilised. And I would go, and all the councillors knew me, and the local paper would lift bits from my blog when the political reporter wasn't around. I ended up then going to work for the local paper. Well, they were advertising for a trainee reporter. It was 2013. And I didn't have a job. And I'd applied for about 300 jobs at this point. So I was like, I will go and apply for this job. My mum kept sending me the clipping, going, they're looking at the Echo. And I was like, I don't have the required qualifications, Mum. She was like, but you can write. I was like, but I don't have the required qualifications. She was like, just apply. And so I went into the office, and I was hungry, and I was cold, and I was unemployable, apparently, and I was desperate. And I sat there with the editor with a confidence that I no longer possess. And he went, you don't really have the qualifications, but I admire your spirit in applying. And I said, well, you've been printing my work for the last year without paying me for it, with my byline on it. So what would be different? And he was like, oh. I was like, and he went away and he conferred and he came back and he went, do you know what, Jack? You've done what I would expect any good journalist to do. You've gone into a room, you know what you want, and you're not leaving until you've got it. I was like, yep. And he's like, I'll take you on a trial. And I went from the Echo to the Guardian, and the rest is history. But all that sort of happened at the same time. I was writing the political blog, and then I was taken on at the Echo, and then the blog sort of just expanded to include my day-to-day life, which eventually expanded to include food. And all of that stuff just sort of mushroomed at the same time.
And when did you realise that the act of cooking a meal on a budget was a political act?
I don't think it became... I think that's really difficult to pinpoint, actually, because I started doing it because I was like, well, I'm doing this and maybe this will be useful to some other people, because by that point, my blog had started to gain traction, and writing about not getting accepted for an apprenticeship because I was apparently too old in my early 20s, and writing about being constantly sanctioned on housing benefit for no discernible reason. All of those things were connecting with people, and there was this little community building, and I was like, well, maybe these people who are in markedly similar situations to myself would also, benefit from this bit of my life as well. So I put a little soup recipe online, and I remember it very clearly in my cold, crappy flat, typing it on my mobile with a god-awful dimly lit photo of a carrot, kidney bean and cumin soup at 17 pence, back when kidney beans were 17p for a can, they're now 31p for a can. I can do that, that's my party trick. And I was getting like 17 readers, and then I put this 17p soup on the internet, and I got 500 readers. And I was like, oh, well, people like soup, right, I'll do some more soup then. and that was it.
So that's really interesting. So you suddenly thought, okay, well, there's an audience for this, and at that time, what were the lessons that you thought you could impart that you were using to kind of make ends meet? I'm interested to know how you went shopping.
Well, I just would literally scavenge up whatever money I had, which was usually bits of change or whatever, or on the day that my benefits would hit my bank account, I would go to the cash point and withdraw £10. So no matter what else happened, what bills came out, what unexpected direct debits came out, no matter how much you try to mitigate those things like gas and energy bills and stuff like that, they will sometimes be higher than you expect, and sometimes the housing benefit wouldn't go in, so everything would skew. I was so organised back then. I had a spreadsheet where all my payments would go in with the dates, and all the payments that were going out would go in, and it would literally turn red on, say like the 24th, that's when the money runs out and you've got other payments coming out. And I'd go, right, I've got 6 days to find £14, so I'd go and pawn something. And I was so meticulously organised. So this media rhetoric that people who have the least are feckless, lazy, disorganised, it's like, no, I have never been as financially responsible and organised as I was when I had absolutely nothing, because you have no option. When every single penny counts, you make every single penny count.
So just give us a sort of sense of what it was like to go around the supermarket with your £10. What do you do?
It takes about 2.5 hours to go around a supermarket with a tenner and a notebook and a calculator, a handful of change and a pen, and constantly be adding things up and taking things off in your virtual list before you even get to the checkout. Because the humiliation of going to the checkout, not knowing what the contents of your basket is going to cost to the penny, means that you end up having to put things back. And I remember very clearly, my local supermarket at the time was a Sainsbury's. Didn't have a Lidl in walking distance, didn't have an Aldi in walking distance, didn't have an Asda in walking distance, but Sainsbury's Basics range back then was all right. It was pretty much fairly and competitively priced. It's not anymore. But I was walking around Sainsbury's and I'd added everything up. I had £6.70 in change. And everything in my basket was written down and added up in the margins and added up. And I got to the checkout and I'd spent £6.69. And I was like, okay. And one of the shelf edge labels had been wrong. And it was a jar of Sainsbury's Basics jam, was 27p, and it had gone up to 31p. And so I had to put it back.
How did that make you feel?
It's literally, you can be so careful and you can plan for every eventuality, but because one of the grocery colleagues hadn't changed the label on the right date and it was inaccurate, I was standing there at the checkout with my face absolutely burning, with a handful of change and a basket of white labelled goods, going, well, what can I take out of this that won't impact everything? Because everything in that situation, it's like a constant, it's like one of those jigsaw puzzles where you've got to move one tile to move the other tile to make the picture. You're going, well, if I take that out, then we're having dry toast. But if I take that out, that's our only protein source. But if I take the stock cubes out, then everything else is just going to taste like nothing. And it's like, and you're standing there, you've got 30 seconds, you've got some tutting people behind you, you've got the checkout cashier blinking at you because it's only 3p. Who doesn't have 3p? And you're just going, I'll leave that, actually, sorry. And it's humiliating. And
that, I mean, you hang on to that, clearly. That's so vivid, that memory. And so when you get to a point where you have an MP who stands up in the House and says, we don't really need food banks because what we need is cookery lessons. Go on. I imagine you're sitting there with your phone. How does that go? How does it go down with you?
It's the people who have the least in our society are generally the most careful and most creative and most resourceful and most organised people that there are. Because it's very, very easy to be wasteful and flippant when you're not having to watch every single penny. And I've been in varying financial situations in my life. When I was in the fire service, in what I call the before times, I had a £27,000 a year salary and lived in a house share before I had my son. And so my house share was £300 a month. So I had this brilliant salary, barely any outgoings, and I would just walk around the supermarket, drop 50 quid on a basket of nothing in 10 minutes flat. But to walk around the supermarket with £6.70 takes 10 times as long, because you've got to be thinking, and the mental labour and the energy and the time that takes out of a human being is exhausting. So even now, when I'm doing, here's my £20 a week shop, or here's my like budget recipes, I'm always very clear to say, but I couldn't do this if I wasn't physically healthy. Like when my arthritis is playing, I can't lug a shopping trolley in a backpack back 25 minutes from the supermarket. Or if I'm in a proper depressive bit or in a poor mental state, there's no way I can plan and execute to that level. It requires so many different moving parts to have a freezer, to have a kitchen that's got a hob that works.
And I think you've also said that you've kind of got a store cupboard of, like, you've got corn flour and you've got stock cubes because you've accrued over time.
I've accrued over 10 years of being a food writer. I'm like, my spices on the side of my fridge are a bit of a running joke. I've got these magnetic spice jars. And my friends over the years have tried to buy me spices I don't have, because I wrote my first 2 books with 3 spices.
Go on, what
cumin, paprika, and turmeric, and mixed dried herbs.
Very nice.
And I was like, that's it. So my friends started to buy me spices, and now they try to buy me spices they think I don't have, and they get really pleased when they get one. And we bring him in, and they'll be like, have you got nigella seeds? And I'm like, yeah, Anna planted them, and I didn't grow a nigella.
Oh, disappointed.
More's a pity.
Yeah.
Because I could do with a hand, to be honest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so I've got like a whole wall on the side of my fridge that's got about 60 or 70 spice jars.
And you've talked well about that idea that you know, it's not for it doesn't work for everyone because some people are starting with nothing.
Yeah. But if you're starting with nothing, I can give you a basic list of going, here's some things that you might want to try to build up, but you don't have to go out and get them all at once. Like, just over time, try and add one of these things to your shop every week, and then you'll end up with a store cupboard of basics.
Let's just think about the nuance of you doing that and an MP giving advice saying people need cookery lessons and it is possible to make a meal for 30p, and actually, you know, being quite directional in what they say. You know, a number of commentators have said, well, hang on a minute, you know, Jack Monroe says this stuff and everyone applauds, and then an MP says it and everyone goes berserk. What's the difference? And just take people through the nuance of like what you're saying and what Lee Anderson's saying.
I really like you, but hearing those words coming out of your mouth made me feel quite violent. I have to say. I was suddenly like, oh. I think I had to be like, no, he's a good man. goody. Settle down.
So what's? Just tell people the difference.
Well, firstly, the Lee Anderson thing, when he said, "Oh, we make these meals for 30p," he was talking about a batch cooked meal that was bought at sort of store prices, but cooking for 270 portions for 50 quid. And you're going, okay, well, that's not really achievable in most households, because then you've got to buy 270 foil trays to put them in and 3 chest freezers. So unless you're offering to buy people 270 foil trays and 2 additional freezers and the energy costs to run them, your 30p meal ain't 30p, mate. But mine are. And the difference is that I do budget recipes from a point of view of not going, if you did this, you wouldn't be poor anymore. I go, here's what I do, and hopefully it'll be a little bit helpful to someone out there. And because I've always, that's where my very first soup recipe came from. And I've tried very hard, consciously. I haven't had to try very hard, actually, but I've always been very conscious to keep that at the core of the tone with which I deliver my work. It's never a finger wagging, oh, if only you did things like I did things, you wouldn't be in trouble. It's a, hey, if you find yourself in a sticky situation, I can give you a Band-Aid for that will tick you over your sticky situation for a bit. But let's also talk about the reasons why you're in that sticky situation. And newsflash, it's not your fault. You are the product of a system that is designed to oppress you, and the people who are the architects of that situation are also the same people going, oh, I can make a meal for 30p, and if only you could do it just like I could do it with my great big kitchen and my 270 foil trays, you wouldn't be in so much trouble. And it's like, well, no, actually, if only you hadn't have voted to cut welfare and benefits and keep these people in their place, then perhaps they might have a little bit more to spend on their shopping.
So I know you're in the process of sending him a legal letter,
yes.
But
sorry, I shouldn't look quite so gleeful about that, should I? It might impact my.
But I mean,
someone will screenshot that and be like.
So just to remind people, I mean, he said what he said.
Yeah.
You responded, and then he went and gave an interview where I might not be quoting him precisely, but he said words to the effect that you were making money off the backs of the poor.
Yeah, so the newspapers have been quite reluctant to report on this because repeating a libel is also libelous, but I can repeat it because you can't libel yourself. So what he actually said was that I was making money, taking money out of the pockets of the most vulnerable to line my own. And then Martin Daubney, who used to publish lads magazines and now just tits about on the internet, being... You know, I could say other things, but I'm like, must look like a nice human. Said that I earn more than the Prime Minister, probably. I was like, well, you see, unfortunately for you, a court of law are going to look at statement of intent as well as actual statement, so you're screwed. But to take those two things separately, to say that I And last year I earned £22,700. I work 120 hours a week. That's, if you do the maths, that's not minimum wage.
I think we were working out earlier on that Boris Johnson made £2,200 an hour when he was writing for the Telegraph. So,
yeah,
just for contrast.
So I did actually look up the Prime Minister's salary, just because I was like, well, I can't say that I don't earn it unless I know what it actually is. I'm fairly sure I don't earn it, because I'm fairly sure he doesn't earn the same peanuts that I do, but let's have a look. 168 grand a year. Okay. Mate, I haven't made that in the last 5. I made that in the last 10, actually. There you go. It's like, well,
and when he has his flat decorated, he doesn't pay for it either. So I mean,
no. And there's all that other stuff as well. And it's like, you just go, well, firstly, my company accounts are public. Why would you say something like that when you could just check? Literally, why would you make such a daft and libelous statement when you could just look and go, oh, actually, no, that's not true, but not say that. But the thing that that most irked me, because that's easy to disprove, earns more than the Prime Minister. Well, no, I don't. Can you prove that? Well, yes, I can. End of conversation. Takes money out of the pockets of the poorest and most vulnerable to line her own, and has done quite well out of it. And I'm like, okay, that's I deliberately publish all of my work for free on my website. Which I have been advised against by my publishers. One of my previous publishers was like, actually, that you've breached the terms of your contract by publishing more than 10% of your book recipes on your website. And I was like, so sue me. I haven't got any money because you don't pay me any money. So go on, take legal action against me then. Well, no, we won't be doing that. We just thought we'd advise you. What? I'm always going to put all of my work online for free, because the people who most need to access it don't have £7, £5, whatever Amazon are selling it for this week, pounds. Other bookshops are available. They just tend to be the cheap one. So I make my work available for free because when I was in that situation, I didn't have the money to drop on a cookbook. And so for my work to reach, there's a phrase that I use quite a lot, and if it's not accessible to the poorest and most vulnerable amongst us, it's neither radical nor revolutionary. And I live by that. I have that, it's my Twitter header at the moment. I have it on my wall. I'm properly like, that is my thing. If it's not accessible or available to the poorest and most vulnerable people amongst us, it is not radical and it's not revolutionary. Now, I like to consider the work that I do to be somewhat, in my field, a bit radical and a bit revolutionary. It's taken me a while to come to terms with that, but do you know what? It is. You know, I'm not sponsored by big major brands a lot of the time because Asda Smart Price just don't have the money to throw at me. And I got approached by Lurpak a couple of years ago, who went, oh, we'd like you to do a cookery series and we'll sponsor it. I was like, are you joking? You're 8 times the price of Smart Price butter. What? I literally couldn't do that with a straight face. Oh. It's like, that's the thing.
Well, that's such a sort of noble thing to carry through and hold when you're doing your work.
It's expensive.
Morals. Well, yeah.
Can't eat them. They don't keep me warm at night.
So you're a hungry, poor, radical revolutionary.
Well, I'm not particularly hungry these days because carbs are cheap, and I'm not particularly poor. You know, I can just about pay my rent and I can just about pay my bills, but that's because I've lived on nothing. So living on a bit more than nothing is it feels like a bloody luxury. Not to go all 4 Yorkshiremen about it, but proper bloody luxury. It's like, well, this is nice, because when you've lived in the place where you're going, oh, I've got 6 days to find something to pawn so I can pay my rent, and you're going, oh, well, I'd better just make sure I keep my food shop to £20 this week so I can pay my rent. They're 2 very, very wildly different places to occupy. And I go, okay, yeah, well, the majority of my disposable income does go on rent, gas, water, electric, council tax, but at least it covers that, because that puts me in a better position than millions of people in the country, so I'm not going to complain about it.
So we're getting to, I can see that our editor has walked into the room, and so we better start talking about inflation.
Yeah, we should. Given that's how I'm pitching myself as your new columnist, so yeah.
James, you're gonna have to rewatch the start. It's a whole thing.
I proper hustled.
We've already. I mean, I've signed something, but I don't think it's gonna.
There was widespread support for it in the room.
Yeah, but okay. So you're an assiduous note taker, and you had a real bone to pick in December, didn't you, with the ONS? Can you just tell us your version of it?
So there was the whole thing about inflation figures, and they were pitched at around 6% and it's like food has gone up 6%, and I was like, that doesn't really chime with my experiences, and it doesn't chime with the experiences of all of the people that I work with and all of the organisations on the front line of food poverty. So although I can party trick, stock cubes were 10p in 2012, they're now 55p for the same size stock cubes, or they're actually £1 for chicken ones. And, you know, I can do that all day. I was like, I just want to check my numbers are correct. Now, I'm a massive hoarder. I like to blame poverty for that, but I've kind of always been a bit of a hoarder. It definitely got worse after I was poor. And so I kept boxes and boxes and boxes of supermarket receipts over the years, because I wanted to, if anyone ever challenged any of my old recipes and went, oh, I don't believe you that stew pack was £1 in 2011 and now it's not available, I could go, one moment, dig through all my boxes and go, got a receipt for it, there you go. So I kept all of these supermarket receipts. No, they were just in boxes by year. Like, where they all are. Yeah. And so I went and I got them. And I sat down and I was like, so I did the Twitter thread first, and I saved it to my drafts, and I went and checked, and I was like, just want to check that the prices that I'm quoting are correct. They were correct. I felt absolutely justified in keeping 10 years' worth of supermarket receipts.
And by the way, you're the only person who fact checks what they say on Twitter with every press sentence. I mean,
99% of the time. Right. It helps I don't drink anymore, so I've become a lot more focused and factual. It's
less sweary or not?
No, that was never impacted. But at least my agent doesn't wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go, "What's Jack done overnight on the internet?" anymore. She knows that I sort of keep fairly regular hours these days.
So it was a kilo of rice, I think, that you
yes. So a kilogram
on.
Bag of rice in the supermarket was 45p for a kilo, and then the next bag up was, oh God, this was 4 months ago now, was £1.55, but for a 500 gram bag, which represented a 344% price increase for a like-for-like product. And I was like, that is not 6%. No matter how you try to carve that up, that is not 6%. And there were loads of other examples. And so I just went through and I did a thread of just the ones that I knew off the top of my head, stock cubes.
You called out the ONS and they got really upset, didn't they?
Well, they did. No, the ONS didn't get upset. Asda got upset initially. They were like, well, how can you prove that these were our prices back then? And I was like, well, this is going to be really awkward for you because I really don't throw anything away. But 3 years ago, you asked to work with me on your smart price range, so you sent me a database of all of your products. And because I am a terrible environmentalist, I print everything out, autistic, and keep it, here it is. And they went, oh. I went, so I'm just going to randomly select 20 items from here now and tell you what they cost in today's terms. So like, oh, we've seen enough. I was like, no, I'm gonna do this. So Asda very quickly went from, our lawyers want to know where you got your data, to me going, you. To going, shall we work together on reintroducing that range? I was like, yeah, that'd be nice. And actually, that was completely unexpected because I expected them to just really, all the campaign work I've done over the last 10 years has basically been a lesson in heartbreak. You get passionately infuriated by something you perceive as a social ill, and you go, I think I may have an answer to that, whether that's benefit uprating, whether that's housing benefit being paid monthly instead of 4 weekly, whether that's about child benefit rates, whether that's about that bizarre third child policy that HMRC introduced, all of the many things. And you get used to going, I think that you should maybe consider doing this for these very good reasons, and people giving you 100 reasons why not. Mm-hmm. So when I said to Asda, and I was like, well, well, what's your justification for just dropping this whole range? So I went and had a look at their business plans, which they published online. I was like, okay, so I can see that when the Issa brothers bought Asda, they took all of their petrol forecourt stores that you want to turn into extra special stores to compete with M&S Food to Go, and that's the direction your business wants to go in, and that's commendable, and that's brilliant, and that's an excellent expansion plan. But while chasing down that market, you shouldn't be leaving this market behind, because for the last 20 years, you've been the grocer's lowest price supermarket, and people rely on you as the lowest price supermarket of the big four, and that's what you trade on as your major brand. So by all means, chase down this bit of the market, but don't leave this one behind. And they went, we'll bring the range back.
Jack, I mean, seriously.
I think it's kind of like, there's that saying,
That's
isn't
a
it,
win.
of when an unstoppable force
that-
meets an immovable object. Well, there's a story there as well. So when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, but when you are both the unstoppable force and the immovable object, you can do shit. Like, eventually you're just like, right, I am both extraordinarily stubborn, but also moving at the speed of light here. So which of these is going to hammer
one of
you
your
down?
superpowers will work. But so okay then, let me ask again on the ONS. So they have I got this right that they said, well, we're already working on something more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And have you been in the door and done some work with them?
Yeah, we've been in basically constant contact.
So what's happening
It's been
there?
lovely, actually. They were very reflective and very quick to go, actually, yes, we recognise that this doesn't serve like all areas of the population equally, that all various sort of income deciles and just sort of proportions of the population aren't represented by an average inflation statistic of legs of lamb and bottles of champagne and bedroom furniture. Those weekly essentials. So what do we need to be looking at? What do we need to be including? And how can we make this work? And we've done lots of like conference calls, lots of chats.
We're going to have to talk about the
and
Vimes
they've been
Boots
very
Index.
good. They have. Well, the Vimes Boots Index I'm still working on, and that is an inflation measure based on the lowest price products at the supermarket. It's been a headache. It's like
if people don't know, this is Terry Pratchett is the inspiration, right? And so Vimes is a character, and Boots are his way of basically demonstrating the inequity of the global economies, right?
Yeah, so basically the theory is if you buy a cheap pair of boots, they're not going to last as long and you'll still have wet feet, basically. Whereas if you buy a more expensive pair of boots, they're going to last for years and years and years. So the proportionality of your income spend, if you buy cheap, you don't just buy twice, you end up buying 10 times over. So I was like, well, we need an inflation index that accurately reflects not an average, but actually how the people with the least and their income is affected by these inflation rises, because it's the budget items that disappear from the supermarket shelves, and it's not just bags of rice and packets of pasta, it's things like kids' school shoes. When my son started going to school, he's 12 now. When he was 4 or 5, I could get a pair of shoes for him from the supermarket for £9. The cheapest pair of school shoes at the supermarket now for him are £22. That's an enormous jump in like 7 years.
Didn't Jacob Rees-Mogg say that our shoes were going to get cheaper?
I don't know. I tend to just. If someone wants to communicate with me from the 18th century, then I'll go for a poltergeist to do that. I'm just like, I'm not. I just know.
Are frock coats in your index? Or not?
What was it I called him in an interview once? Something like a haunted Victorian coat rack. People keep tweeting it back at me on Twitter, and I'm like, stop repeating the mean things I say. I need to look nice for the libel trial. But
I can see there's a flag on our screen, which is never a good sign if you're having a conversation you want to carry on. and I'm very aware that I haven't let anybody else ask a question, so apologies for that. I think that it would be really helpful just to try and round up by just thinking about what you think people can do about food poverty right now, what you think supermarkets can do, and what government can do and isn't, notably.
as individuals, I'll always tell people, donate to food banks, whether that's food or whether that's cash. And you will have a food bank in your neighbourhood. Everybody has a food bank in their neighbourhood. There are now more food banks in the UK than there are branches of McDonald's. So if you've got a McDonald's in walking distance, you probably have a food bank. No correlation between the two. It's just a statistical accuracy. Before anyone pulls that out of context. Christ. This is why I write, because I can edit. But not just food banks. There's also like hygiene banks, beauty banks. There's organisations who are working to tackle period poverty, and these are all different strands of what is essentially the same thing, which is human beings who don't have enough income to meet their most basic human essentials for a dignified life. Not even a joyous life, just a remotely dignified one where you can, be fed and not bleed through your jeans. I mean, that's not too much to ask, is it?
And what about the supermarkets?
Supermarkets, this is a tough one because Asda did a great thing by bringing back the Smart Price range. But I'm not paid by them and I'm not affiliated to them. And there's a reason why I'm not, because I don't want to not be able to hold big organisations to account. So I'm like, well, not for sale, actually. The other thing they could do is pay their staff a fair wage, because a large number of their staff claim in-work benefits and top-up benefits, and Asda's profit margins are double what their staff claim in benefits on an annual basis. So, and Asda's just one example, because they're the ones that I really went on a big deep dive in a way that could be useful to a slow news newsroom.
I mean, we like a spreadsheet, we do.
I love a spreadsheet.
I'm not going to lie.
But all the major supermarkets are the same, all the big organisations are the same, and you go, well, what sort of society do we live in where all of the major supermarkets, their workers are claiming in-work benefits, some of their workers are using food banks, so they're putting the food on the shelves and then watching as people put it in the food bank basket at the end of the checkout, wondering which of that is going to be theirs. That is not a just society. So supermarkets could pay their staff a bit better, and then they'd have fewer people relying on top-up benefits and even fewer people relying on food banks.
Right,
and the government, I'll wrap up,
the government. I've got one more for you as well. They could uprate benefits in line with inflation and the true cost of inflation, not an average that's used from 6 months previously. And I raised this in Parliament a few months ago in a DWP Select Committee. I said, why does the Treasury use 6-month-old average inflation statistics to determine the rate that benefits are set at? And the answer came from the Resolution Foundation without even a hint of irony. Because, Jack, the Treasury benefits from using old data, old inaccurate data. The Treasury benefits. So 7 million people missed a meal last month because they couldn't afford to feed themselves or their families, because in the majority of cases, benefits aren't uprated in line with actual inflation costs for poorer families. And that is a deliberate decision, because the Treasury benefits, and Lee Anderson wants to say that I take money out of the poor and working class families' pockets to line my own, when actually the person who that accusation well and truly can be levelled at is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Can I ask you one more? What should a slow newsroom be doing about food inequality, do you think? What's not been covered?
I think one of the things that hasn't been covered with any real depth by any mainstream news organisations has been the sheer scale of people who have died as a result of deliberate decisions made by the DWP. And I am currently writing a book about that, not to plug my own book, because God knows when that'll be finished, because it's extremely difficult, traumatic to write, and not to mention re-traumatising all the families I have to go and interview for it. So I have to keep taking breaks from it and going away to stroke my cat and stir some risotto and rock in a corner. But there are literally thousands of stories, and I've got them. I put out a call for submissions 3 years ago, and I set up a separate email address for it, and I got 5,000 emails in 2 days.
Did you really?
From people who had a family member or a close friend who had died, and the stories all follow such a similar pattern as well. It's somebody who, for some inane reason, was sanctioned and lost their benefits for 16 weeks, became unable to feed themselves or look after themselves. Poverty is isolating and harrowing, so these people tend to withdraw from their friends and their family into their darkness and their cold and their hunger and their misplaced shame, and they die. And I could reel off a list of names. And it's that every time I write something for The Guardian, and I will name and shame them here, and I go, OK, well, let's talk about Stephanie Bottrell, Philippa Day, let's talk about David Clapson, let's talk about Jodie Whiting. They go, well, we can't do that. And their lawyers go, delete, delete, delete. You can't accuse the DWP of manslaughter. Oh, but I can. Corporate manslaughter by design. You can't say that. I go, OK, I'll just say it on my blog then. But that is something that really warrants investigation. And the DWP spend more money in forcing claimants to go to a retrial, which is an expensive system, which only 10% of people who are denied like PIP and other benefits by the DWP, only 10% of them have the stomach to go, no, I do qualify for that, and I'm going to chase that down. 90% of them just fall by the wayside.
Yeah, and as you say, that sort of feeling of shame and isolation, it sort of goes to the heart of what you're doing. If it's not a handbrake turn, and I'm aware we're a couple of minutes over already, just to finish on a different note, what gives you most joy about cooking and thinking about meals, and what do you love to make for you and your boy?
The one thing that gives me more pleasure than anything else is cooking for my partner, my son, my partner's family, my friends, and putting a meal in front of them and everyone clearing their plates and saying nice things. And I go, still got it. You're not bored of cheesy rice yet. Because 95% of the time it is a variation on rice with cheese. I'm not going to lie. We like that in my house. But that's the thing. But also just... I mean, sometimes I'll get really. I'm autistic with ADHD, so I can get hyper fixated on things. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, Polish food week, and I'll just go down a whole rabbit hole of Polish food, and then I'll be like, right, done that. Right, now what?
Finished.
But being able to just go and explore something new like that. I mean, people say, oh, you're on your 7th cookbook. Haven't you run out of ideas? I'm like, well, no, I've got another 19 folders of recipes that I'm yet to publish, that my publisher just laughs nervously when I mention them. And I'm like, no, Carol, we're publishing all of them.
This sounds like Prince's back catalogue. There must be some that you're ashamed of. I mean, that lamb recipe, you know.
No, but I did one year I did do a tweet on the 1st of April that a lot of people took quite seriously, but it was actually a serious tweet where I started out with one of those classic apologies saying, like, I've learned and grown a lot as a person over the last 10 years, and I recognise that some of my previous behaviour has been wrong, so I'd like to take the opportunity to formally apologise for every recipe I've ever published that only had 1 clove of garlic in it. And if I could go back and republish all of them and put 4 in, I would.
Yeah. Brilliant. Jack, thanks so much for being yourself. And there you go. And if we do want to turn it into a job interview, you see that guy at the back there? He's the one. He's the one.
We'll wait until we'll see what my lovely lawyer who got married today is going to wake up tomorrow, newlywed, and go, what the bloody hell did she say? How's she going to prejudice that trial?
Yeah. Jack, it was tremendous. Thanks so much, and congratulations again on being Campaigner of the Year.
Oh, yeah, that. Thanks.